Hello and a very warm welcome to our session, which is all about making the leaders of tomorrow part of today's recovery. My name is Satnam Rana and I am the Head of Communications at Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership. Today's session is very much focused around, as I said, young people. We here in the Midlands have one of the youngest populations and one of the most diverse regions. And these populations really create communities that are brimming with opportunity and with potential. However, the pandemic, as we know, has hit many communities hard and unemployment is soaring. And in particular, young people have been affected by the pandemic. Their career development stalled, apprenticeships stopped, and the economy at times grinding to an almost halt. So in this session, we're very much going to explore the mood music amongst young people. What do they feel and how have they been affected by the last 15 months? Secondly, we're going to look at very much about our established business leaders and as gatekeepers in our businesses, how can we keep the doors open for young people and engage with them? And then thirdly, we're going to look at areas of how we can ensure that young people still have access to jobs and training in a bid to drive post-pandemic recovery. So we'll be exploring some of these themes, answering some of these questions and hopefully giving you a few takeaways as well. We've got an excellent panel this morning for you, and I'd like to introduce them as one by one. So if I could invite along Alistair Trippett, first of all, who is the founder and director of BM Holdings Limited. Alistair is in charge of a commercial residential property investment firm. He's a trader and a developer, and also a self-proclaimed nomad with an innate ability to diverge from crowds and trends. Next up, we have Lily Eaves. Hi, Alistair. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Satnam.
Next up, we have Lily Eaves, who is from the Young Combined Authority. Lily is in charge of the environment portfolio for the Young Combined Authority, and she's one of about 33 young people who sit on the board influencing the region's decision makers. She's just finished her A-levels, so congratulations and well done, and is hopefully going off to uni to study law in Bristol once the results come through. Now, the Young Combined Authority has recently published a Vision for Future document, and I'm sure Lily will be giving us much more insight into that. It outlines the priority areas for young people here in the West Midlands a little later on. So Lily, thank you for joining us. Hi. Next up, we have Alonge, who is the founder and CEO of Equal Group. Now, Equal Group is a data-driven diversity and inclusivity consultancy. It's really dedicated to eliminating issues of bias with traditional organisational patterns and management systems, and it does it through diversity and inclusivity using tech and consultancy. Welcome, Mac. Hi, nice to have you.
Hi, thanks all.
We also have Isabel Sherrington, who is a tax advisor from EY, joining us this morning. Hi, Isabel.
Hello.
Hi. Isabel joined EY in 2018 as a school leaver. She's 2/3 of the way through studying for a chartered accountancy certification. And last year in Birmingham, in the professional services category, Isabel won the Outstanding Apprentice of the Year. So congratulations for that, and thank you very much for joining us as well.
Thank you.
And last but not least, please welcome to your screens Sophie Drake, who is an account director at Storycoms. Sophie has most recently made it onto the 30 under 30 PR Week 2021 list. Back in 2018, she was on the 30 under 30 list for Birmingham for young people to watch out for. And she's also the board director for young people at Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership. Thank you very much, Sophie, for joining us this morning.
Morning, everyone.
So I'm really looking forward to getting inside your heads and really getting a feel for what you think that young people can do and the role they can play in recovery as we come out of this pandemic. As we go along, for all of you who are joining us this morning, I would love to throw your questions at the panelists as well. I don't really want to do it at the end, so if I can weave those questions in as we go through our conversation, that'd be great. And if you could pop them up on the Q&A bit on the right-hand side of your screen, that'll help me filter them out and pose them. So let's start off with the pandemic. I mean, this has ruled everybody's lives over the last 15 months. From your perspectives, personal, and then I guess within your peer groups and your working peer groups, how has the pandemic affected young people? If I could start with you, Alistair.
Yeah, so especially where I'm located in Staffordshire, it's been quite an interesting one, because the general trend would be for, especially my peer group, is to go to university. That normally takes them out of the area. Then they go work in a city, or generally because of employment opportunities, they tend to just look to get further away from their home turf as possible. But it's been quite an interesting shift when the pandemic hit, that a lot of them actually could start working from home, move back with their families, didn't fancy being cooped up in a one-bedroom apartment in the city centre of London, paying extortionate rents. So it's been quite a nice shift, and I suppose an opportunity and an eye-opener to see how we can potentially take the job, well, utilise the jobs that are in the city centres that are often better paid and more career focused and driven, but with the comfort and convenience of living in the semi-rural or just less developed areas and the benefits that come with that.
So actually quite a positive outcome from your perspective, which is really quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, especially because I'm still in my home turf of Staffordshire, so it's nice to have all my friends back. But all in all, I'd say, yeah, it seems to have definitely created some positive steps for a lot of them.
I saw lots of shaking of heads going on around the screen then. Isabel, for you, what's the experience been like, pandemic? I assume you've been sort of studying and working all the way through it?
Yeah, the transition to working and studying from home was quite sudden. We thought we'd be working from home temporarily, and then I realised probably needed a slightly more permanent setup. I also have a mentee through the EY Foundation, which is a charity associated with EY, and we had a bit of a scramble because a lot of her work experiences were either cancelled or moved online, and she, like Lily, is looking forward to moving on to university in the next year or so. But what she's actually found is that because of online delivery and removing these issues with logistics and scale, it's actually opened up a lot of opportunities for her all around the Midlands, and indeed the rest of the country as well, that are now able to open up these opportunities to people who aren't so nearby. And I suppose it makes it less centred around the cities as well. She's not having to commute into Birmingham or London to find these, and can actually join right from her laptop.
Mac, how about you? Thank you, Isabel.
I agree with kind of what's been shared from a work perspective. I think there has been a number of opportunities for people to work remotely, to engage in a more positive work-life balance to some extent. But I think that the flip side of that has been people not being able to really separate from work. The clarity of boundaries has kind of been lost. You know, I think in kind of pre-pandemic world, you'd go to work and you'd be able to leave your work there and go home and kind of have that separation. That's not always been the case. I think the pandemic has also thrown up a lot of, a bit of a spotlight on inequalities. And I think from a working from home perspective, there's always the assumption that people have got steady internet connections, places to work, as in office spaces and desks and things like that. And what we found is that actually that's not always the case. You know, you've got people with siblings, young siblings running around and not really having the space to be able to have Zoom calls kind of back to back. And you know, if they don't necessarily have the equipment, so laptop and kind of monitors and cameras and microphones, it has been quite difficult for people to make that transition. So it's not been seamless for everyone. I think that there has been quite a spotlight on the disparity in experience for some communities. I think also for people that are early careers, they've missed out on kind of the face-to-face mentoring, the face-to-face coaching that often goes on in the work environment. So being able to learn from your peers, being able to learn from people that are a little bit more experienced, not necessarily the technical side of things, but also the kind of the softer skills that you learn kind of on a day-to-day basis. So there have been some disparities. I think that the diversity and inclusion, obviously that's kind of my area of expertise, so I can speak on that. It has heightened a lot of inequalities, whether you look at kind of the social aspects, the education aspects, or the health implications of the pandemic.
Can I bring Lily in on this? Lily, because obviously you've been doing your A-levels at home, and that transition from being in front of teachers and then having to do it all at home. How has that been for you during the pandemic? Has it?
Well, kind of just speaking on it, because I'm kind of the age group that's kind of teetering on the edge of entering the workforce or still continuing with studies. I'd say it's been very much a double-edged sword. There have been some great positives, like work experience has been moved online, as Isabel said. I think I actually attended one of EY's online virtual work experiences. And you've also got things like, it's really simple stuff, but going online, you actually have a lot more kind of access to your teachers. But at the same time, like Max said, there's a lot of disadvantages that have been exacerbated. And people from traditionally disadvantaged backgrounds definitely have not had the best luck with this. I know there were a lot less people on my online lessons, and I'm from a quite good catchment area, and I believe that that's not going to be for all schools. And then with predicted grades, it's going to very much disadvantage people going forward. And that's why I think contextual offers and things like that, even adopted by companies, needs to be introduced to stop this disparity from widening in the future. Okay, so gosh, Sophie, let me bring you in. For you, the pandemic, I mean, you're in the workplace, and if you don't mind me saying, sort of on the upper end of young people's spectrum. So you're an established, account director at Storycoms, you're sitting on boards. Has the experience been positive, negative, or a mixture of both for you?
It's a good question, Satnam. I think that it's probably, as Lily said, a bit of both. If I'm putting my Storycoms hat on, we're quite lucky in our industry, being a PR agency, that we can do our job from anywhere with a good Wi-Fi connection and a phone. And we didn't make any staff redundant, and our team growth and our business growth has stayed the same, and we're on target, just as if COVID in terms of the strategy hadn't happened. But yes, there was some short-term pain in getting everyone set up from home, but then if you put the LEP hat on and outside the day job, I think the mood music, as you said, about young people is actually, there's some short-term pain, and we've definitely seen that our region benefits from having the most youthful population, but also, sectors hit the hardest, like retail and hospitality, but also those on apprenticeships, as you said, much of that has just disproportionately impacted on the young people of the region. So definite some short-term pain. We've seen the likes of the Prince's Trust's Youth Index. They're highlighting that, young people's aspirations and their hope, I think 41% of them feel like their future goals are no longer achievable. So, there's obviously some real work to be done on, getting them back in, back at the heart of the recovery and back at the heart of plans. And I think, with my LEP hat on, it's not a dire situation. We are, going to see some short-term pain, but it's actually forced a lot of organisations like the LEP to put youth at the heart of strategies, whether it's for sector plans like low carbon, right through to all of the skills delivery that they're doing with the Skills and Apprenticeship Hub. There's, it's actually put a real impetus on making young people part of the future in the economy of the region. So I think, there are negatives, and obviously there's some really big issues we need to address around young people feeling engaged and feeling hopeful and feeling, like they're playing their part in the story of the region. But there's a huge opportunity there as well in the next 6 to 12 months, and how we, put them at the heart of all of those recovery plans and get the opportunities going for them again.
And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? For people who've joined us in this session, there'll be young people, there'll be people from businesses and organisations. It's about how we change our mindsets and look at our future workforce and how we can invest in our future workforce now, so that they can be an integral part of the economic recovery as we move into the next stages of post-pandemic world. I've got a question that's come in from Tom Erskine, if I can throw this to the floor. Do the panel feel there are barriers to influencing the future of our region? And how can we ensure those voices are heard so that the Midlands is preparing now to meet future aspirations for the next generation? Sophie, you might want to pick up on this because you've touched upon some of the work that's being done through the LEP and I'm sure through Storycoms as well with young people. Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really good question, Tom, because actually it's exactly why having a youth-focused panel on today's event is such an important thing. You know, making sure that we are part of these debates and part of these discussions about what next for the region. I think, you know, it's a real tell that Invest Midlands have put us on this agenda today. And likewise, you know, the fact that we've got a real diverse panel from all over the region, it's a show of how engaged the young people are when we get them involved around the table. And how much they have to say. So I think, you know, that's a real plus. But the barriers do exist. And I think, you know, we have to seize the opportunities where they exist. And I think, you know, pointing to where Lily is at the Youth Combined Authority, you know, the West Midlands Combined Authority is at the forefront of the West Midlands and its sort of political and, you know, day-to-day activities of our region are kind of spearheaded by that combined authority. And just the fact that they've set up a youth board and have those guys delivering plans, you know, having a voice at those tables. Likewise, the LEP and a lot of the youth activity at the LEP, you know, it's about having our presence on these major investment or like vehicles and organisations so that we can actually take a lot of the stuff that we know about what young people are feeling, doing, needing, and actually putting that into the plans of these big organisations that have the money and that have the power and that have the kind of buy-in and like engagement from the region. So, you know, I think that's how we should tackle those barriers because they do exist. But things like having youth boards and young people around the table is the first sort of opportunity to tackle those barriers in a way.
Lily, for you as a member of the Young Combined Authority, I know that you've recently published your vision document, Vision for Future document. Do you feel by creating these pieces of work as a board, you actually will make a difference? Are people listening? I guess, you know, it's one thing producing, but are the big people of the region listening to you? And if so, how are you making that happen, Lily?
So I'm quite fortunate. I'm not only just on the Young Combined Authority, I'm on another youth board for Beat Freaks as well. And in obviously say that these organisations do listen to us. It's not we're working separately and that's it, and they just want us for kind of brownie points and saying, look, we've got a youth board, it's diverse, that's enough. They really do take in consideration. I can't speak for everyone on the board because I'm specific to my portfolio, but I've been invited to speak different kind of meetings that normally young people would have no access to. And it's a bit daunting, actually, because I will be sitting there with probably a bunch of 40+ people, all probably experts in their fields. And I'm just sitting there like, OK, I've got the youth perspective. But they're genuinely interested. They do ask questions. And this is just the first step into it. We've been established for 2 years, the Young Combined Authority. We've released this. And it's mostly about scrutiny at this point. But I can really see it going ahead and being something a lot bigger.
Great, thank you, Lily. Mac, how about you as a, you know, as somebody who goes into organisations trying to erode some of the barriers and bias that exist? Do you feel that there are barriers for young people when it comes to being heard and influencing and persuading? Yeah,
definitely. So I think some of the barriers are kind of a willingness to really listen. I think you've kind of previously touched on it. I think sometimes there's a tendency to engage in tokenism where you invite a young person's view just to have a young person's view rather than that view shaping anything that you're doing going forward. I think some of the organizations need to really grapple with themselves in terms of how authentic is their willingness to change. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to shape the future in the same path as the past, and by that I mean doing the same things that you've always done in the way you've always done them, changing a couple of little things around the edge, but not really changing fundamentally what you're doing. I think the pandemic has been a great opportunity for companies to really grapple with purpose, to really seek to understand what value are you adding to society as an organization. What does that look like for different individuals? What does that look like for different communities? And there needs to be more of a deliberate means to tapping into some of these communities that have been typically overlooked. And you can only do that by having an authentic relationship, an authentic connection. And I think it can't be a sprinkling of youth and a sprinkling of kind of, you know, we have our main board and then we have the youth board that sits separately. So there has to be more of a long-term approach to integrating and making sure that a younger perspective is part and parcel of what happens going forward. So for me, leaders specifically need to be really intentional about the future that they're trying to shape.
Isabel, in your organisation, how does it work? Are there structures in place that empower young people to speak up, speak out, and influence and persuade, or do you feel that actually there are still barriers that need to be broken down?
Yeah, I mean, within EY, we have kind of formal systems to share feedback. For example, there's something called EY Voice, where we can speak to local representatives and that gets filtered through the organisation. But I'd argue what's more powerful is the willingness within our culture and the enthusiasm within our culture as a whole to listen to people across the business, including young people, and take on their ideas and support their passions, their enthusiasms. A really good example is I joined in the international tax practice, but I was passionate about technology and I'd seen what EY were doing with technology and I thought it was amazing. And I started speaking about this after I joined the firm as an apprentice. And within a year of me starting, I was able to join the technology team on a secondment on a part-time basis. And even though I had no background in technology, I was actually able to lead a software development team as a business analyst, because they recognized that this different perspective with someone coming in from outside the organization combined with passion and enthusiasm actually had quite a bit of value there and was able to shape the platform offering, particularly for people who weren't used to working with new technologies, and that I could kind of offer that perspective. So my experience has been that, yes, absolutely, that's reflected in our organization. And I don't see tokenism when it comes to young people being as much of an issue for us.
And Alistair, if I can throw it to you, it must be a different experience as a business owner and a trader and an investor. Do you as a young entrepreneur feel as if your voice is heard, or do you do anything to enable other young people's voices to be heard in your field of work?
Yeah, so it's I mean, obviously I come from a slightly different perspective, but something I've identified, obviously one of our businesses is property management and lettings, and that's very process driven, and it's a very traditional industry. The whole estate agency market is a very traditional industry where I'd say the majority of business owners are, well, I suppose in a youth group, they all seem relatively old, but in the older proportion. And I think, like, just from we employ young people, and just by, we're obviously not fearful of technology, we embrace technology, and in an industry which is process driven and regulation driven and has to be auditable, and the paper contracts and Excel spreadsheets that some of these people are running with, it's just not the way that things should be done these days. So I think there's a great opportunity and almost a leverage of young people and skill base that they can bring to these businesses to step back and say, right, there's inefficiencies here. Let's work with technology, which I've grown up with, kind of thing, to really implement and make changes to push an industry like that forward.
And I know we were talking about, well, I was sort of saying in our lounge before the event, how young people really can be used as disruptors in the workplace to create solutions for the future. And that ties into being an integral part of the economic recovery as we move forwards. I've got another really interesting question, which we have touched on a little bit, but I think it's quite pertinent, because actually, I've got 5. I've put myself as a young person, but I'm not. I'm actually one of the oldies who sits around in meetings. But 5 young people who are ambitious and successful at your points in life right now. But how do we ensure that more disadvantaged groups within the next generation are not impacted permanently? And this is a question that's come in from, I hope I've pronounced your name right, Inge Kettner-Wood from Sutton Coldfield Charitable Trust. Thanks for this question. So how do we ensure that the more disadvantaged groups within the next generation are not impacted permanently? Because actually, they're going to sort of come out of school and be competing for jobs. Isabel, you might, as a school leaver who came straight into EY, it's pretty impressive. Perhaps you can start us off with this part of the discussion.
Sure. Something that I've seen being incredibly impactful through the EY Foundation, which is an organisation that specifically focuses on students that are eligible for free school meals or have been at some time in the last 6 years. Mentoring has been amazingly valuable for them, and obviously in the last year that's moved online. And while that moving online can replicate some of the more intangible aspects of school life, such as nurturing and social interaction and building confidence, as well as practical support with job applications and things, I think there is a risk that it can deepen divides if people, as we've discussed, don't have access to those laptops. And that's where I think the role of certain charities, for example, Strive for College, which is an organisation that gives people access to places to get free devices, points out locations where you can access free Wi-Fi, things like that. They're the other part of the puzzle. So while there are organisations that offer great mentoring opportunities, great online opportunities, which, as I've mentioned, remove that kind of logistical challenge, I think actually having the physical equipment is just as important, and it would be great to see more local government agencies as well as charities stepping up to provide that.
Mac, I suppose it ties into your work, doesn't it? Because that's it's maybe not about the software, sorry, the hardware. For you, it's more about the software end of processes.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question from Inga. I think one of my observations is that sometimes we look at disadvantaged groups without doing the work to understand why they're disadvantaged. And I think unless we start to develop our understanding of disadvantage more broadly and understand what aspects of that disadvantage are systemic, so to what extent are they built into our processes and procedures, it becomes a bit redundant when we start trying to fix groups. And I think a lot of the interventions that we see are largely focused on, how do we help this group by training them or by upskilling them. One of the things that we will say is that talent isn't disproportionately allocated. So everybody has equal opportunity in terms of the talent. They don't necessarily have equal opportunity in terms of their access to the workplace or to political structures. So we need to understand what more we can do as a society or as a community to address some of those inequalities. And I think Inga rightly points to the fact that if we don't do that work now, there's a danger, there's a risk that these things get hard built into our systems, into our structures going forward. And I think the pandemic has been a great case study in terms of, I think if Isabel or Lily mentioned it before, in terms of the assignment of predicted grades as an indicator. When we start to do a little bit of fact finding and looking at who is most at risk from those policies, it is people that are traditionally disadvantaged. If you're in a school that is under provisioned in terms of budget, in terms of resources, there is a risk that your grades will be hard coded and your future won't be as bright as somebody that is from a more advantaged background. And I think there's an opportunity there for organizations to really change the way that they're inviting people into their organizations, the way that they're assessing people's talent, assessing people's capabilities. We can't continue to do what we've historically done in terms of asking or requiring people to have 10 years experience to apply for an entry-level position or to have first-class degrees, because we need to understand that there are barriers to some of those standards or qualifications that people experience on a day-to-day basis, that is typically through no fault of their own. So as organizations, how do we ensure that we're bridging the gap between ourselves and I guess quote unquote disadvantaged groups?
Thank you, Max. Sophie, I'm going to bring you in on this because obviously a bit of inside knowledge from a GBSLEP perspective. You know, we're working on our young people strategy at the moment, and these are some of the discussions that we are having internally about young people and breaking down those barriers. And it's really interesting to hear that it's not just about the skills. Actually, there's much more in the background that needs to be considered. But organisations like the Combined Authority, and Lily, I'll come to you in a moment, and GBSLEP, you know, huge policy driven strategy making organisations that invest in the Midlands, in the West Midlands, are an integral part of our political and socio-economic structures. Traditionally, let's be honest, even a person like me would have struggled to get into an organisation like that, yeah? And I'm not even young anymore. I'm talking from, there are barriers there, simple. So what do you, Sophie, with your GBSLEP board hat on maybe, how do we overcome this in a real meaningful way rather than just, yeah, let's just bring some young people on, in your view?
Yeah, I think just picking up on what everybody's been talking about in this sort of question so far, I think there's obviously that sort of real priority to get some of the basics sorted. So that sits outside the main, but the basics like tackling the digital poverty, doing the basic bits like ensuring inclusive transport of the region so that young people from all over different wards, all over the region can actually get to job opportunities and can get to skills training, can get the very basic stuff. So can they get to things? Can they afford to travel? And do they have access to the technology and the tools that they need to kind of tap into some of the, you know, yes, virtual learning and stuff that we've delivered through the LEP over the last year. We've got things like the skills, the youth card, which is online work experience, and the same for Speakers for Schools. We're tapping into schools and trying to offer work experience virtually. But as Mac and as some of the others alluded to, there's some basic stuff to sort first so that young people can actually access those things, because they're great having them there. But if we can't get young people onto them, especially those in the disadvantaged communities, that's where we're going to come up, you know, short. But then, you know, as you said, Satnam, there's that bigger picture, bigger kind of strategy and higher level piece, which is about kind of what Alistair alluded to, understanding the challenges of young people, kind of what we've all alluded to, understanding what the challenges are, and they are many and diverse. So, you know, the same challenges a young person in Staffordshire might have is completely different to what the young person in one of the wards in central Birmingham would have. So there's a big piece to be done around understanding that stuff, and there's a lot of investment going into data research and having a youth voice on things like LEP and Young Combined Authority. And once we have all of that stuff, it's about then delivering those kind of real targeted interventions. So, you know, and things, you know, organisations like the LEP exist to understand that stuff, think about the interventions that need doing, the investment that needs to go into certain areas, and then actually, rather than trying to do all of that stuff entirely on its own, it's about understanding which organisations and which bodies and groups exist across the region. So is it the likes of Beat Freaks in Birmingham? Are there schools that reach out to disadvantaged groups in certain areas like Redditch and Wyre Valley? And understanding how we can, as a LEP, get the bigger picture, put a strategy together, but then actually how that's delivered through investment and through the organisations that have the access and the engagement of those young people in those areas is vital. So I think, you know, bigger picture needs to flow down, and it really comes down to that collaboration and communication piece as well. Because I think just one final point is we did a project at the LEP back in 2018 with Beat Freaks to understand why young people in Birmingham weren't able to access tech and digital jobs in the city. So we did a big research piece with Beat Freaks and went out to schools and colleges around the region to find out from young people why they didn't, you know about these opportunities, what they saw the barriers being. And some of it came down to some of the basic things, like they didn't understand that a tech job wasn't sitting at a computer and being a coder or a digital specialist, that actually some tech jobs in the region are purely about managing people and or working as a project manager in a team and having some basic administration skills. So there's actually a lot of work to be done, and that project highlighted some very basic things that we can tackle head on as sectors, you know, from digital to tech to property to law, about what the actual job opportunities are in the region. And if you're a young person with a certain specific set of skills, don't discount yourself for those jobs just because you think there's a miscommunication or a misperception about what those opportunities actually are. So I think there's a number of opportunities that we can do, and it's kind of how we understand all the challenges first, and then put together those really strong collaborations with various organisations to get there. So
I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Collaboration. It's not working in our silos. We all have great intent, but if we all work with our own intent individually, then it's just little bits of work that's being carried out across our cities, towns and local centres actually come together, and the power, well, may the force be with you, basically. Lily, you come into this as, you know, somebody who sits on the Young Combined Authority. Your representatives are from obviously the Combined Authority area. Do you feel, it might be a tricky one to answer, I don't know, but do you feel as your organisation that you wholly speak to the disadvantaged groups within our region and represent their views adequately enough, I suppose, in some of the mainstream governance structures that we have around our cities and towns?
So as Young Board, I think one of the great things about us is they went in with a goal of creating a diverse board that represented the views of the West Midlands, because you can say you have a young board, but if they all look the same and all have the same kind of thought process, then there's really no point in having one. And I think that's what makes the Young Combined Authority so effective. All of our points that we made, we considered every kind of community. You can see that mostly with our inclusive communities portfolio, which is not to consider what would be affordable for everyone, young people, old people, how to build it in an effective way, but also make it sustainable to make sure that they are included in this kind of process where it isn't just going to be outdated housing. And environment, I considered also factors about this. I considered how things like environmental racism play in, and how young people can't just be expected to have the same approach to the environment, because it is an issue that affects all of us, but not all of us are on the same playing field. I really kind of agreed with what Max said. And actually, I don't know if many people know this, but the 10 years kind of experience kind of stereotype came in with the 2008 financial crash, where experienced people were going into entry-level jobs. And this is why a COVID recovery strategy is so important, because we're going to see another economic dip, and we don't want to have young people pushed out of entry-level jobs that they desperately need. The unemployment of young people is systematic with the rise in retirement age and also reduction in wages and other factors. So we do need sustainable and long-term solutions to fundamentally support people into the working sector. And it is a fatal mistake to assume that people are from the same socioeconomic backgrounds, because there are so many factors kind of playing into this. The Department of Education actually created a program where A-level students received letters of encouragement from university students from similar backgrounds, and actually increased the amount of people going to Red Brick and just university in general. And if we can see representation in these in-demand sectors from disadvantaged background people, it will really help push people into these sectors. And we also need to make sure that, although we've got programs like the Sutton Trust that are national, it gets people in traditionally stuffy kind of fields where you need a university degree. And those are not the only paths available, and they can kind of put people off. For example, in 2017, the most in-demand career was actually being a chef, which is not kind of what you probably think. Following COVID, it is medical professions like nurses and doctors and kind of people supporting the ward, but also in the West Midlands specifically is engineering. And there are a lot of modern apprenticeship routes that can help people get into that. And I think we need to push for that further, because university is not always a suitable option for everyone.
Okay, gosh, Lily, that's really insightful, actually, and you know, just totally echoes the fact that we do need to put young people at the heart of everything when it comes to economic recovery, because you will change mindsets and perceptions. You're doing it already, I'm absolutely sure, in this session. Alistair, I think, if I'm right, if I remember reading right, you came into property at 18 for some bizarre reason, but I don't know why. So you might be able to give us a bit of a reason why in this next, in your answer to this. But with your property hat on, and I suppose lettings as well, and then going back to that question of how do we help disadvantaged groups? I mean, actually, young people getting onto the property ladder, that's going to be a big thing when it comes to recovery, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've got big shoes to fill after Lily's input there, but yeah, the changes we've seen in the housing market have been incredible during COVID. I think we all battened down the hatches when the country was put in lockdown, all waiting for a crash. Investors were pulling out and no one was transacting on houses. Although interestingly, I would say that the housing market was probably one of the strongest and most stable industries throughout. It did shut temporarily, but did it really shut? Probably not. But yeah, we're seeing a massive demand and increase in people wanting green spaces, moving out of the city areas. Like we say, we're better connected now than we've ever been before. The Midlands is incredibly connected anyway. I mean, I live just near Stoke-on-Trent. So with our connectivity links, we can be within Manchester, Birmingham, Nottingham, Liverpool, all within an hour. And the way I think we've almost done a shift that I'd like to see, that we don't go back from, where we don't need to all be cooped up in a central hub. We can operate from these areas. And as I touched on when we opened up in the intro, it would be great for someone from my area to see that, okay, I was very fortunate to go to one of the private schools in our area, and out of my year group of 100 plus people, I was the only one that didn't actually go to university, which even when I suggested apprenticeship, because I had a very engineering and mechanical mindset, even when that was suggested to my head of tutor, I'm sure she won't appreciate me for saying this, but it was almost considered that apprenticeship wasn't the way to go. And I was almost pushed to university or nothing. So to the point where I actually put in my university applications, but never actually said I wanted to go. So they were revoked. And there's some big employers in our areas, and especially with some plans that, especially in the Stoke-on-Trent area, for like the enterprise, the Ceramic Valley Enterprise Zone and things like that, that we've got employers like JCB and Bentley, that for those people who aren't fortunate enough to go to a private school and get the good A levels, they provide really solid and career-focused apprenticeship schemes, to the point where I'd imagine a lot of my friends that went to university are probably envious of those that went in on the paint floor of Bentley, but have now got managerial roles. And yeah, to be honest, it's probably one of the few ways of getting into a career focused industry, as opposed to just applying to a job, as it would seem at the moment, where there's no real progression. So yeah, I think especially my area, it seems like we're trying to attract these big employers with development areas and brownfield sites that, you know, our rents are going to be a lot cheaper. So let's attract these big employers, these big warehouse distribution, whatever it may be, that can relocate their hubs to the Midlands. And I think that'd be fantastic for this area.
Sophie, you want to come in? Thank you, Alistair.
Yeah, no, I think that was a bang on answer, Alistair. And I think it highlights one real, perhaps challenge / opportunity for our region about aspiration and kind of the inspiration of the region. So I think we've got some hugely exciting sectors. You know, Alistair just alluded to some of them, low carbon, tech, life sciences, for example. Well, I think one of the biggest things we need to tackle in the next sort of 6-12 months is about the kind of aspiration piece, not just for young people, but as a culturally diverse region. There's a lot of challenges and barriers to young people when it comes to actually convincing their families and peers that the career they want to go after is a lucrative, long-term, sustainable career for them that's going to give them really great opportunities. So, you know, rather than some of the traditional industries that we have, you know, seeing where parents and peers might see their, you know, job opportunities being, it's convincing quite a lot of the population that sit outside and influence young people that there are so many exciting things that they can get involved in that that real long-term career development opportunity. So yeah, it's one of the big things that I know a lot of organisations like the LEP and the YCA and the Combined Authority are looking at, is how do we, you know, make that young person's influencer network bought into the opportunities as much as the young people themselves, because sometimes these sectors are a bit misunderstood and people don't really understand them, and you know, it's, oh, just go and work for a law firm instead, or just go and work for just go into the medical profession and be a dentist or something. There's some real basic stuff to tackle at a cultural level to open those opportunities up for young people.
Yeah, spot on, Sophie. And I, you know, obviously coming from the LEP and from a LEP perspective, the skills and apprenticeship hub, the flip side of that is businesses and skills and matching the right skills needs with the right skills training. And that is actually sort of a connection where we have been a bit disconnected in the past. And there's some real good strides and real huge strides being made to level up, using the government's words, with level 3+ qualifications. And I know it's one of our ambitions to increase level 3+ qualifications. And much of that is about matching business needs with skills training. And then that middle bit, what you've just talked about, is really, really important. And it is a cultural mind shift, which needs to happen ground up, really, from our communities up and from our homes and our parents and our social circles up. I am going to have to wrap up really quickly, but before I do, I'm going to open it to anybody. So stick your hand up and answer this question, if you can. To what extent do you think that we need to move away from Generation Z, millennials, etc.? Is this the correct approach by society and the workplace to put these labels on young people, or is it adding to stereotypes? How would you like to see yourselves described, if at all? Or should we not be putting anybody in a box? Stick your hand up.
Lily's there.
Lily.
I've thought about this before, and in terms of saying like, oh, strawberry generation, or this is the generation that liked whatever, I don't think it's very helpful, but I do think there's a lot of insight that can be provided through generations, and that's why we have them. So for example, Gen Z, and probably younger millennials too, grown up through education and now just starting to enter the workforce through 2 economic crashes, which will affect our future going forwards, and it cannot be ignored. Millennials entered the workforce just as the 2008 financial crisis happened, and then going back to older generations, they had a kind of more stable economy, and that does really impact us. Also, there's loads of different world events that go on, which I think will change our perspective going forward. So COVID, you're probably going to prioritize where you live, and actually what job you're doing and how you want to get to that next step in your career, maybe not through traditional routes. So I do think it does provide a lot of insight that needs to be considered.
Thank you. Isabel, do you want to quickly add? I've got about 30 seconds to go. Go for it.
Sure. Yeah, like Lily, I don't necessarily agree that there is value in segmenting the workforce and putting people in different boxes, but it's worth recognising the advantages that will come with bringing these new generations into the workforce, like being digital natives, and also prioritising our personal values and wanting to see those reflected in our organisation. I really hope that this will lead to more responsible, like socially responsible organisations with management cultures that value diverse teams and two-way feedback. And that's certainly something that I appreciate about my role.
Thank you so much. I am going to have to wrap it up. And for everyone who's joined us this morning, thank you so much for your questions and for your comments in the chat box. I think for me, you know, if we can all go away and think about our own structures in the workplace, meaningful engagement with young people, not tokenistic gestures, perhaps keep authenticity at the heart of what we are trying to do, and being open-minded to look at some of our traditional procedures, our traditional ways of working, and how we can disrupt them in a positive way to add to economic recovery. Because at the end of the day, sitting here are 5 young people who are our future. And if the leaders of today don't invest in people like you, then we will not have that pipeline of talent. And for me, that's a really important factor when it comes to levelling up, when it comes to creating economic recovery, which is sustainable and also embedded in really solid personal values which have shifted and changed over the last 15 months. So really huge thanks to all of you. Just to say a bit of a pointer, we have an exhibition area, so do head down there and have a look at some of our exhibitors right on the left-hand on my left-hand side of my screen, so left-hand side as if you're looking at your computer. And our next session is all about placemaking with a purpose, so please do hop along and join us for that as well. Thank you so much to all of you. It's been brilliant listening to your views, and I wish you all the best with your careers, future, and most importantly, your work-life balance as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.